Welcome to the Aya Om podcast. I thank you for sharing your breath and your energy with me. And today we're talking about breathing. Conscious connected breath work, specifically of the Breathwave lineage. This episode is for you to learn about the conscious connected breathwork practice, to learn why our breathing goes off, why it's important to practice conscious breathing. I'll talk a little bit about some common breathing imbalances and how we can correct those through the conscious connected breathwork process. And I'll share with you a little bit about how I create the conscious connected breathwork sessions to run in a good way, using the body work that I do, setting a safe and sacred space, etc. So let's start early. Let's start off at birth. Most of us are born with a perfect breathing pattern, and if you watch a baby breathe, it's quite magnificent. The belly moves, the heart moves, everything's expanding in orchestration. Everything's relaxing without tensions in the body. This is a representation of that baby having a beautiful conversation with the universe through the breathing process. What I mean by that is there's a language to the breath. It's not English. It's not your conversation with the breath. And the breathing process is the perfect metaphor for how we are living. So a baby is born into this life, unless they have some early childhood trauma or stress, in a real good way. They're not holding negative emotion. They're not stressed out by their mortgage and what's going on next Tuesday. A baby is natural. It's free, it's open, it's available, spontaneous, authentic. And that's represented in the full breathing pattern. Now, over time, you know this. If you accumulate stress, what happens to your breathing? Short, shallow, turbid, irregular, can't take a full breath. Now, stress is the blanket term for many things that can go off in the nervous system, but each negative emotion, or any emotion really, has a corresponding breathing pattern. The negative emotions have irregular patterns, such as when you're angry. It's like a shorter, sharp inhale without a full exhalation. The exhalation's like a I'm angry. And it is true that if you were to simply mimic that angry breathing pattern, it's quite easy to tap into unprocessed emotion of that nature. So too, the sorrowful sadness breathing pattern it's like a patterned, hesitating inhalation, turbidity, and an inability to exhale fully, and in general, an inability to take a full deep breath into the lungs. Shock or fear, typically it's hard to breathe at all. When you straight up have shock, you can't breathe in. Take your breath away. Not in the beautiful sense. So every negative emotion leaves a residue in some sense of that negative emotion. And if we actually experience that emotion in the moment, we don't carry it. So that's the thing with a child. They're born into this life and they process their emotions. Once again, the vast majority of them process their emotions in a good way, meaning if they have a negative emotion, if they're feeling angry, they'll tantrum. They'll freak the fuck out. And when they're done, they'll go back to being a happy little baby. When most people, say you go in traffic, you get angry, you throw your tantrum in your vehicle, they often don't release that. They don't let that go. They still hold that anger. And by supper time, they're still carrying a residue of that. And part of that residue is represented in how the breathing pattern has changed in that time. And part of that negative emotion is stored in the body as a control, a holding, a tension. And we'll get more into where these tensions are held and what those mean when we go into body mapping. But just for now, know that when we hold negative emotion in, that it's going to prevent the flow of energy and motion, which is emotion. So we want to ideally have clarity and fullness in our breathing process. So going back to when you were a baby, you had this beautiful full breathing pattern, and any traumas, any early childhood experiences which were too intense for you to fully experience at that time will be held on by the body. It'll be stored in the memory. So when you have that intense experience, whatever was going on, you're going to create a number of beliefs about it. These are subconscious beliefs, so you're not aware of these, especially when they're in the early years before you're verbal. You can't even speak to them. And even when you become conscious and you can speak to your early childhood, these are so deep in the memory banks that you weren't recording memory in the terms of language, or it's just not accessible. So you've stored all these conditioned beliefs from those early childhood experiences, and most everybody has these. And it's no fault of parents, it's no fault of really anyone, there's no sense in blaming. But when a child comes into this life, they have many needs, and it's impossible to meet all the needs of a child at every time, all the time. So when a baby is reaching out for love, and they may get that love most of the time from the parents, but if there's one instance where something happens, maybe dad dropped something on his toe and he yelled, they might react to that, and that might condition the system, their nervous system, to react a certain way, especially if that pattern's repeated. And they're going to create subconscious beliefs about what it is to have love, what their attachment style is the world safe, all of these things at a very young age. And if during those times they were experiencing stress or negative emotion, which is often the result of not receiving what they need, then they're going to pattern their nervous system, and this is all going to change the breathing process. Time we accumulated this breathing pattern, and this is part of the language of our breath. Now there's layers to the breathing, in that in our moment-to-moment experience, whatever we're experiencing will be represented in the breathing process, but there's also deeper patterns. And someone like myself who studied the breathing process and takes people through the conscious connected breathwork practice can help to reveal those to the individual and help to clear. That's the representation of the emotion that's trapped in there. And even the belief structure is stored in the matrix of your energy body. So we have this long history, this legacy of the breath that we're working with. And just like our flexibility, we're trying to just, in some sense, regain the natural flexibility we all had when we were children. If you look at a young male or female child, they're very flexible. We're born, once again, except for a few exceptions, with an incredible amount of flexibility, mobility, and strength. The body naturally develops. The breathing naturally develops in a good way, and it's only through our patterns of how we were raised that things go off. The breathing process is, yes, it runs by itself. And we can begin to move the breath in the breathing process. We can begin to consciously breathe, and we can breathe a little deeper, we can breathe a little longer. And this is going to change our mental emotional state. This is the self-regulation that we were all seeking when we were children, that we didn't know we could resource ourselves with. And the majority of people in the past generations weren't taught this as well. So there's this generational teaching of everybody's looking to meet their needs. But most people are looking outside of themselves because that's the pattern that we've been operating in, because we haven't realized that we have everything we need. And even if we've realized it intellectually, putting it into practice is another thing. Especially when you're inundated in a culture where the vast majority of people are seeking outside of themselves. It takes a great will to be able to turn within and actually release some of these older negative emotions and traumas. Because trauma is stored within us. Negative emotion, our past memories are stored within us, but it doesn't all just come up all the time. We have certain psychic armor that we wear subconsciously that keeps everything bottled up. And it's only when we enter into a safe and a sacred space, a healing space, or take a plant medicine or certain other things that can be a catalyst, that this emotion is able to come up. And it's not always good when it comes up, but for the vast majority of the time, the body has a wisdom that it doesn't bring up all of your shit when you're just chilling on the bus. I mean, some emotion might come up depending on what's going on, depending on how much pressure's in you from the stress that's been going on and whatever else are the conditions of your life. But for the vast majority of times, the body keeps the score, but it keeps it held in until we're willing to do that work. It's a very much a conscious process to initiate, to do that healing. And we can heal through the breath. And the breath, in my understanding, is one of the most empowering and effective ways. There are many healing processes and practices, from trauma therapy to psychedelic and plant medicine work, various other movement systems, etc. The reason why I love breathwork, and I do take part in, a vast majority of those other systems, the reason I love breathwork is it's self-resourcing. It's just what I've been speaking to. If you use plant medicine, if you work with a therapist, those are great. But it's also really good to work with your own breathing because you have it within you at all times. No one can take it from you. And the more that you work with the breath, the more effective it becomes. The more effective it becomes and the more confident you become in yourself, the more self-resourced, self-aware, self-regulated, self-empowered. And of course, use external things as you see fit. But when you're sovereign and you have an inner strength, those other things are going to be so much more potent, and they won't be something that creates dependence or it creates limitation. And it's not simply the breath. There's so much more to the breathing process than I can cover in this video, and that most people are aware of, and most people are aware of how beneficial the breathing is. I've talked to thousands of people, told them that I'm a breath worker, and they go, of course, the breathing is so important. I know when I'm stressed, they might say, I know when I'm stressed that I stop breathing and that my breathing is shallow. It's so important. And yet, how much time do we devote as a collective society towards breathing processes and practices when it's the number one thing that keeps us alive over food, over water, over sleep? It's the number one thing, and when the breathing process is off, every other system's off. Your whole nervous system is calibrated to your breathing. As you inhale, sympathetic nervous system fires. As you exhale, parasympathetic, which shifts the body into its resting and digesting and recovering mode, into its active and engaging, and in case of stress, that mode is also activated. So when we are stressed, we have too much energy using, too much activation, and the nervous system becomes tilted in this more yang direction rather than the yin or the balance. We have a society in the West that's very stimulated, very yang, very stressed, very externally oriented. So as a natural balancing agent, the breath offers an avenue for more self-awareness, for slowing down, for regulation in a busy world, for finding things within. Because true fulfillment comes within. It's a function of the mindset. Gratitude is the attitude. You will never be fulfilled by eating or having sex if you're merely focusing on the thing outside of you for creating the exact conditions inside of you. Because whatever is outside of you has a limitation. It's outside of you. It's in time. If you begin to tap into the natural fulfillment and contentment, a resource within yourself, it's like filling your cup up from within. You can continue to nourish yourself in that way. Once again, it's going to create less dependence on the things outside of yourself. My journey with these practices has shifted my life more and more to living in meditation, in yoga, and practices. And this isn't the life for everyone. I know that's not going to appeal to many people when I say that. But what it's offered me is the capacity to not need a TV, not need this or that, not need to, I live in Squamish, to go biking for my greatest joy. All of which, it's raining. Oh, I can't go biking. Well, I have my breathwork practice. Oh, well, I can't do this anymore because I broke my leg. Well, I have my breathwork practice. Well, when you get old, you can no longer do the things you could do when you're young. Well, my favorite thing to do is breathing. I can do that. For me, this has been like the greatest discovery is I can orientate more of my time towards investing in a process that no one can take away from me. And once again, the more you do it, the more you fall in love with it. And it's not just me doing it on my own. This is a movement. The world is becoming more and more aware of the breathing process and how powerful it is to shift our emotions, to shift our mind, to return to source, the inner wisdom, the language of the body. Not so intellectual and mind-based. It's helping us to breathe down into the body and feel. Because that short, shallow breathing pattern doesn't allow the breath to penetrate into the depths of the lower belly. The lower abdomen in many people does not expand because of the stress. If you don't breathe down into the belly, you don't feel. There's a disconnection there that develops. There's a consciousness that comes with the breathing process. The deeper you breathe, the slower you breathe, the more you can feel. Feeling the sensations in the body, but also tapping into the wisdom of the organs. Many people read diet books. There's thousands and thousands of diet books out there telling you what to eat. Those are great resources. But your body knows what you need to eat. The intuitive intelligence, your body's sending signals all the time. If you eat something that's not good for you, your body is sending a whole panoply of resources to try to deal with that, to buffer the inflammation and to release things that are going to help to mitigate the damage there. And it's also going to send signals to the brain that's going, we don't like this. There's more information coming up from the gut in the viscera in the body than from the external world, because there's more information and intelligence within. But unless we take time to turn within, all of our awareness and attention is focused outside of ourselves. Most people's orientation, if you were to map it out in terms of light, is like a flashlight looking out at the senses. What the breath worker, and by extension the yogi and many others who take part in these mixed mind-body arts practices, aim to do is to take more of their energy and intention and turn that light of awareness around. Not necessarily to live off in a cave and completely shut out from the external world, though pratyahara is a word that means sense withdrawal, and it's a very important development that each individual has a capacity to learn to withdraw their senses. This is going to allow you, if you learn it, and many other individuals, to not be so conditioned and reactive to the environment. Because if you're always looking outside of yourself and your senses are orientated out there, your environment becomes a lot more important than an individual who's looking within, because there's more focus placed on their center, on regulation, on responding instead of reacting. The individual who is looking within is regulating their state at a higher level than someone looking outside who is reacting and seeking outside of the self. Once again, I'm going to keep hammering this in. I'm not saying going outside of the self, finding things outside of the self is in any way negative, but this is like the ideal yin and yang. There's a balance between internal and external. It's like a foot in both doors. Too much orientation in one over the other produces imbalance. And as a society and culture in the West, the vast majority of us are very externally focused. So the teachings that are most resonant and most potent for us at this time is to turn within and find greater harmony. Because excessively seeking outside the self without that inner contentment is only going to drain the resources of the individual and of the society and the earth that we're on. So coming back to the breath is coming back to the basics, the fundamentals of life. That fundamental conversation you started with the universe when you were born. Bringing that back into harmony and balance. And when you do, your whole life goes back into harmony and balance. Because all of your problems are within you. There are no problems outside of you. If you go into nature, no problems. You are the problem that goes into nature. This is true, is it not? Nature functions, and what I mean by nature here is the natural world, the jungles and the oceans. They function in a way that is the balance of chaos and harmony. This is the balance that if we live in harmony with the natural world, the universal law, natural with the cycles of the breathing and the cycles of the planet, we come into harmony. And when we fix our biorhythms, picture, like eagle eye view. When we're stressed, the hormones of stress begin to create cortisol. And this goes in the bloodstream. It speeds the system up, puts it in sympathetic dominance. And seeing what resources we have. That stress often gives us a sense of there's not enough time. And we become very controlled when we're in stress by our control patterns, compulsive eating patterns, addictions. We have all these external control patterns. There are also internal control patterns, which when we're really stressed, our breathing in our throat space in particular becomes very controlled. It's harder to exhale with ease and grace. The throat becomes very congested energetically. It's like when you shake up a pop can or a pop bottle, the lid of that pop bottle is like your throat. And the percolating, bubbling fizzingness is representing here your abdomen in the unprocessed emotion and stress that's causing dysregulation because you can't digest well if you're in high stress. The rest and digest system is the parasympathetic. When you're stressed, the blood shunts away from the organs, shunts away from the immune system, goes to the skeletal muscle so you can be in action and activity. It pumps the adrenals. Adrenaline flowing through the system. This is not your resting and digesting and relaxing mode. So a higher level of nervous system regulation doesn't necessarily immediately solve the problems, but you can only perceive what you are the same vibration of. If you're in a stress state, you have a stress consciousness that lowers your capacity to be in a heightened state of emotion. So this is going to prevent you from interacting with people in a positive way. When you're stressed and that closing up of the throat space happens in the improper breathing, your body is signaling to you that it's not well. There's disconnection. You can't make optimal decisions. Optimal decisions don't just come from your head. They come from listening to the heart and the emotions. The more stressed you become, the more negative emotion you store, which prevents the free flow of motion. Your gut, your enteric nervous system has a great intelligence as well. Once again, if you're really stressed, you're no longer digesting well. The absorption of your nutrients isn't happening. So on and on a downward spiral happens. So when you begin to regulate the breath and the body more, you tap into this intelligence, the intelligence within, the intelligence of the body. And you begin to loosen your attachment to your problems. And then a lot of that worry and stress from those problems is projections of the future. Your breathing takes you into the present. All of your problems are problems of the mind. All of our suffering is our relationship to the suffering. All pain is it's just about the relationship to pain. This is the Buddha's wisdom. This is the wisdom found in many traditions, is that pain isn't pain. We have a relationship to pain. Pain is a teacher. Pain is real as an experience. I'm not denying that. But our relationship to pain makes it what it is, whether it's positive or negative. If you've never worked out and you start going to the gym, you often feel discomfort and a kind of pain. But individuals who regularly work out love that discomfort. If you go in the cold water, the habit pattern reaction is to avoid discomfort and go towards what is comfortable. If you're like many individuals who likes cold water exposure, this actually becomes very pleasurable for the system. And so too, we can turn all of our pain into reward, gratitude. This is a spiritual process. Fasting, ritual pain, ritual burning, tattoos, taking all these different things which normally people orient away from and making them a spiritual process, a process to become more grateful, to build strength, to build resilience. So breathing commonly goes off due to these stressors. These stressors happen since we're a child, so we have all the accumulated stressors in the body and then the more active in the moment, like with what's happening to you now. So how does the conscious connected breathing process, like separate from other processes, really help this? Because the conscious connected breathing process is an hour long at least, this is a dedicated period to retrain the breathing system, to build the breathing pattern so that it can become repatterned. This takes time. And this takes a correction of the breathing, which isn't found in all breathing systems. Many breathing systems teach breathing, and they do it for short periods, which can help to change your state, but often doesn't get at the deeper traumas in the history, like the legacy of the breath. And many conscious connecting breathing systems teach breathing, fast breathing, slow breathing, but they're not recorrecting the breathing pattern, which means that the subconscious breathing patterns will become more and more active. And in some sense, when we breathe more, we expand into life. So an individual who begins to do breath work without recorrecting their breathing patterns may begin to expand into their imbalances. So if you have a tendency to be more yang, to be more active and achieving, you begin to breathe more. That's going to imbalance. And that's fine if you're looking to embellish that, but most people aren't fully aware of what their subconscious pattern is and how that's affecting their life. So the teachings here is to learn to come into regulation, to down-regulate the system, and to up-regulate the system. It takes a lot of self-awareness and practice to know where you're at and to change the orientation. And this is why conscious connected breathing in the Breathwave system has a facilitator working with you, because you can't see your subconscious patterns because they're subconscious. As you become more and more aware, you can get better at it. You can bring in more regulation. But even after all the years that I've been doing this, I still need somebody to help me out to continue my work. I can do some of it on my own. I can keep in regulation, and I practice mostly on my own. But I need others to help me to see what I can't see. Especially in the beginning, because most of the patterns we've been living and operating in for so long, often since childhood, that it's like a fish being in water. It's just not aware. It's just not aware of what is so present in the life. So in the 1 hour session, the breathing process and the technique goes like this. The inhale meets the exhale. So there's no pause or gap between inhaling or exhaling breath. The inhale is full, and the exhale is relaxation. The practice is in and out of the mouth. Let me share a little bit about why we do all of those. The connected breathing, also known as circular breathing, creates a current in the body. As inhaling breath meets exhaling breath, it's like completing a circuit. It builds an energy. And even if you're tired, continuing to connect the breath consciously, attentively, will begin to build this circuit, and you'll cultivate energy. Cultivating energy, prana, chi, it's a kind of life force. It's a kind of energy that has an intelligence to it. Because all energy we take in has intelligence. When you take in food source, it has intelligence. Part of the intelligence is in the DNA of what you're eating. If you eat meat, it has a certain intelligence that comes from that animal. If you eat vegetable, it has a certain intelligence. It has a life force, meaning it has the force of light. Meaning the sun is the primary energy source of our entire universe. Primary, or is it the only one? I'm not going to go in that right now. So light comes in, plants photosynthesize the light, we can eat those plants, they may produce fruits. That is why the fruits and the vegetables have the most life force. They have the most light force in it, because there is the least amount of conversion between that light and it's going into the plant source or whatever the food source is, and then we can ingest that and we can gain the most off of it. Now, if it's an animal, they'll typically have eaten a plant, and then we'll have eaten them. So that light has changed a little bit. There's less of that light in there. Now, I'm not proposing any diets here, and that's not the purpose of this episode. But I am offering that in terms of breathwork practices, the most optimal ways of doing that, of creating change in this way, is to eat as little as possible before your breathwork practice. Outside of your breathing practice and other hours, that's another story. But the less you have in the body, the more potent the breathwork practice is. I don't want to get sidetracked there, so I'm just going to jump back to our conscious connection. Conscious connected breathing produces an energy which is similar to breathing in the light, because the energy is all around us, and the breath is one of the most, it's like a pluripotent stem cell. It can really be made into anything in the body. It is a resource that is most easily converted and distributed into any part of the system. Whereas when you eat a complex food like a protein, it has to be broken down and it has to be changed in a number of different ways, whereas breathing in and simply absorbing light as well is the easiest way for your body to access that energy. So the conscious connection of the breath It's going to help to as well keep you in the present moment. And if you're aware of inhaling breath, the transition between inhale and exhale, exhaling breath, and the transition between exhale and inhale, 4 points, there's not a lot of opportunity for mind to think. Many people who practice breathwork and breathwave and conscious connected breathing are amazed at how little they think during the 1 hour session. And for many individuals, they can meditate or be without thought for the vast majority of the session. And these are individuals who may have never meditated or who have trouble meditating and shutting the mind off for minutes even, or moments even. So this is a meditation tool. It's a meditative object. So it gives us a place to attend and focus on. And as we're focusing on the breath, we're breathing in and out of the mouth. Now the practice can be done through the nose, but typically it's taught through the mouth because this process and practice is aimed at release. It's aimed at creating a lot of change and releasing these old stored traumas and bonds. And it's easier to release through the mouth. It's easier to express through the mouth. When you're moaning, when you're running as fast as you can, when you're yawning, anything where the body's trying to release is typically using the mouth. If you're looking to regulate, the nose is optimal. For the most part, always breathe through your nose during the day. Unless you want to really push the system or you want to release. Those are the two times when it is very optimal to use the mouth for a period of time. The mouth also, when the mouth is open, the jaw relaxes. As mentioned, stress often affects the throat and the jaw. As somebody who's worked in the dental profession for many years, the vast majority of people do have clenching and grinding habits. Once again, often subconscious. And they're often not aware of why they're doing that. And it comes from, once again, stress, holding of negative emotion, often withheld anger, or the need to express some emotion or say some truth that's not available or they don't feel safe to let out. So the mouth open helps to relax the jaw, helps to relax the nerves. The fascia can become soft. As you're breathing, you can breathe into your TMJ joint. This can help to bring, I call it nerve force. So when you begin to breathe, you create that current of energy. You bring energy through the body. The nervous system has more energy flowing through it. And this relates to nerve force. Nerve force is like your nervous system. Think of your nerves as little conduits. There's more energy moving through them. If they were pipes, there would be more water and water pressure. So there's more energy flowing through. And a common experience, I'm going to try not to get sidetracked from our conscious breathing and the technique process, but a common experience in the breathwork practice is tingling and numbness. And it's like when you've been sitting on your leg and it's not receiving nerve force, it's not receiving the connection of circulation. And then when you finally stop sitting on that leg, like my leg is actually doing this a little bit right now, it's going a little bit to sleep. When that energy comes through, it's like when you unkink a hose, there's a lot of pressure, and that's going to give nourishment to those nerves, bring circulation, and that's often coupled with that tingling. Now when you begin to breathe, often the tingling happens, and in some sense it can be that there are blockages in the system that you're not aware of, that are from stress, from holding, from tensions in the fascia. And it can also be that you're opening up new nerves. Maybe your body has never received that much energy before, and you're beginning to have neurogenesis. New nerves are growing as well. You're beginning to pump more energy into the system, so the nervous system has more resources to begin to grow, creating perhaps brain-derived neurotrophic factor and other molecules that help the body to grow. Now, conscious connected breathing, once again, the connection of the breath and the open mouth are what we have established. the inhaling breath is full. The inhaling breath is enlivened. It is dynamic. When I say full, the full breath begins at the tip of your tailbone. Your lower abdomen expands. It balloons down as the thoracic diaphragm, your primary diaphragm, pulls down as you breathe. And this allows the belly to expand. And as you fill the belly up, like filling a glass of water, the breath will naturally come up into the chest. And even up, because you have another diaphragm in your throat, even that diaphragm will open if you don't have too much tension in the jaw. And then the breath can, in some sense, you'll get a visceral feel for this as you do the breathing process. You can even breathe up into your mouth. And then the upper palate is another diaphragm. And the energy of the breath, obviously not the physical breath, goes up into the head. So there's a capacity we have to bring, it's more appropriate, I would say, to say chi or prana into these regions, but we can just say we're breathing into them. Breathing into the abdomen, the heart fills, and even the head expands. And we want to do this in a way where the breath flows like a breath wave. It's not forced. It's not using our muscles to force the breath up like a wave. Using our muscles is often, it's using control. It's using effort. And we want to really mitigate the amount of effort we use to breathe in this process to make it most efficient and effective. Now, when I mentioned in the beginning that we hold stress in the body, the stress is held at multiple levels of the system, and we don't really have a developed way of talking about the energy bodies in our Western science, but the traditional Chinese medicine and the yogic systems I study have a more developed way of talking about the kind of layers of energy that we are made of, because it's well recognized in science that the universe is made of a electromagnetic spectrum of energy. And of course, our nervous system is the energy body, right? We have electricity running through us. So there are layers of energy. It's been shown that the heart, for example, has a large electromagnetic field that extends outside the body. So they have a more developed way of speaking about some of these things. And we hold emotions in certain parts of the body. And I'm not going to dive into too much of that because I won't be able to in this video, but know that we hold tensions in the body, and they represent various belief structures, thought forms, and negative emotions, and things that are stored in the body. That it's an intelligent memory bank waiting for the right moment to reveal that, so we can gain the wisdom of what was from the past that we haven't fully integrated, that we haven't fully understood, and that's why it's holding on to it. And we can hold these tensions in the organs. Chinese medicine, each of the organs holds a different emotion, but we also hold a lot of that stress and tension in the diaphragm, all the diaphragms, but the primary diaphragm. So if you're experiencing a lot of stress, one of the reasons why it's hard to take a deep breath in is because there's a stickiness in your primary diaphragm, which is attempting to move down. On the inhale, it's like a contraction there, and then it's attempting to relax as best as it can on the exhale and simply recoil back into place. So if we have a lot of stress in the system, that diaphragm has been trained, just like you train your body in the gym, to function maladaptively. Now, by doing an hour of conscious breathing, you can relieve a lot of those tensions. You can begin to work out, stretch, and mobilize, in some sense, the whole diaphragm muscle, because it's a muscle. Just like any other muscle, it likes a certain amount of resistance, a certain amount of stress, you could say, like a hormetic stress to it, to allow it to expand, to grow. So the inhaling breath is an opportunity to work with that expansive force, the contraction of the diaphragm, making that breath nice and optimal, breathing down into the lower belly, the lower abdomen, which so many of us fail to do because of the stress and the maladaptive breathing patterns, But unless we're getting that expansive force, all of the organs don't receive the energy of that breath as effectively. And that expansive force isn't just carrying the breath in this breath wave, but the expansion and the natural contraction is a massaging force that pushes and pulls. It's like bringing blood into areas and pulling it out, right? It's like another pump in the body. And the blood is the primary way our body brings resources to the cells and takes away the byproducts, the waste, and circulates it through the system. The immune system is partnered in some sense with the circulatory system, in that when the circulation is running, the immune system is also running parallel. So more circulation through the blood, more circulation through the immune system. The expansion and the contraction as well helps you to digest more. And the intelligence of the breath that I was alluding to helps us to better identify the food and create the proper molecules for digestion. We have more of a connection to our food as we breathe into it, because the breath and the breathing process is associated with consciousness. You become more conscious of your body and of the sensation of what's going on within you. You're tapping into that intelligence as you breathe in. And then the exhaling breath is relaxation. So this is not, it's not, in those two breaths, I was controlling my inhale and exhale. Then I was prolonging my exhale through control. Once again, there's many systems of breathing. It's not wrong to do that. It's advantageous in certain settings for certain periods. What we want to develop in this process is a capacity to completely relax with ease and grace, which when we're stressed, the nervous system dominates in that sympathetic tone, and we can breathe in, we bring that energy in, we contract in, but it's harder to relax. And if we're imbalanced, we're contracting more than relaxing, we're breathing in more than we're breathing out, we're using more energy than we have time to rest and recuperate with, then we're growing out of balance. Then we're going into sympathetic and yang dominance. So not everybody is sympathetic dominant. We're all unique, and different circumstances are going to create different conditions depending on how we react to them. But the vast majority of people are in that dominant sympathetic stress tone due to the nature of the Western world. It's very stimulating. There's a lot of activity. There's a lot of doing. There's a lot of thinking, using energy, stress. It's not a culture that is developed in going for walks in nature and meditation, taking things slow, creating art. Of course, those are there. But the development of those and taking part in those is all naturally going to resource ourselves with that more rest and digest, relaxed form of breathing and being in the world. Now, the cool thing about breathing is you can regulate your nervous system in such a way that you can take part in more activities that are stressful while maintaining regulation. So I'm not espousing a way of being in the world, which is to what somebody in the type A world would be like, that's a hippie stuff. Well, maybe you'll do a lot less of what you were doing, and that might take away from some of your goals. But if that's the case, you'll be happier doing what you're currently doing, but you're not going to do in the future. I hope I said that in a way that makes sense. That was my fear, at least, because I did so many things. That was my pattern. I was a doer, very much an achiever. And I didn't want to slow down because my stress was saying, you have all these things to do and you don't have enough time. And you have all these goals and I want to accomplish them. I don't have time to sit around and breathe and meditate and do yoga. And that was my fear. And what I found was I let go of a lot of that because the self-resourcing of regulation and contentment was so great that I realized I was doing a lot of things that I was doing because I was trying to feel a certain way, and I found that I could feel really good without doing any of those things, and I didn't have to do so many of them. And this allowed me to change my orientation of what I was focusing on, and actually I became more productive because I had more energy naturally. I was able to get off caffeine, and I was better to sleep better and regulate better and eat better and digest better. And this actually gave me more energy to do the things that I wanted to do. And it let go of a bunch of things that I was doing which weren't actually in my highest values, that I was just doing because they brought me a certain state that I liked, which I could let go of because I was more resourced in my natural state of joy, contentment, inner joy, inner contentment. So it's a very simple technique in that way, right? Breathing in and out of the mouth, breath is connected, take a full breath in, relax the breath out. Ideally, there's no sound on the exhaling breath, and that's it. Because that's a nice, beautiful pattern. As I mentioned, your inhaling breath is sympathetic, your exhaling breath is parasympathetic. If we're breathing in that way, the breath is balanced because you're relaxing on the exhale, stimulating on the inhale. You're teaching the nervous system to fire in a way which is most coherent with what it's already doing. Whereas many people in that dominant yang pattern of efforting are trying to do so much that it's like taking little inhales and inhales and inhales and inhales and never wanting to exhale because you're constantly wanting to go, go, go. And the body's like, I need to relax on the exhale. The whole hypertension and many of the imbalances that we have due to common disorders and diseases are the product of these breathing imbalances. Now there's more mental, emotional things caught into that, but the breath is all of those things, right? It's holistic healing. You change the breath, it changes the body, the mind, and the emotional system. I've seen people heal from all kinds of things, from cancers and from having, what's the one with the face? Parkinson's, when the face becomes like monotone and can't smile. I've had individuals start smiling. People with bad injuries that they didn't think they could heal, back issues, a number of different conditions circumstances such as deaths and divorces. Those individuals could more rapidly recover, not the right word, to move through those emotions with ease and grace and to make shorter that recovery time of processing or mourning. Because it's processing. Our nervous system is processing information. And some of us take a long time, like the example of that person in traffic. They're taking a long time to process that stressful negative emotion, where a child throws a tantrum, processes it right away, it's done. It's learned the wisdom of that, it's gone. Not in the system. Now, I'm not telling you to throw a tantrum to release your emotion, but I'm offering that breath work can help you to move that energy out in a very quick way so that you can move on with your day. So this is the second video made about conscious connected breath work, and there's just way too much to talk about. So I'm going to have to close it up pretty quick here. But we've talked about the technique here. We've talked about some of the reasons why breath can go out of balance. And I want to share with you that this technique is really powerful. I have helped people to release early childhood traumas, birth traumas from pre-verbal years. And this completely shifts the system, because if you have an early childhood stressor, it may be running at a low level in the system. It's like all of our fear is in the system. It's undealt with. You may not be experiencing that fear in your conscious mind, but it's running in the background like a background program. And you don't realize it until you release it. It's with so many things. If you become used to being sick and feeling like crap, that's just your normal state. And until you become healthy, you don't realize how sick and feeling like crap you are. It's the same thing with this built up negative emotion and improper breathing pattern. Many people don't know how good it feels to just breathe and be in the world, because there's so much negative emotion and stress built into their system that they're not aware of it. And within a single session or multiple sessions, individuals get a real clear knowing of what it can feel like to breathe and the power of their breathing. Because your life energies flow in accordance with the breathing. If your breath is easeful and full, that's your experience of life. Life is about a relationship. We are creating our realities. So when we change the way that we show up, just as I was talking about with the opportunities, we have that eagle eye vision, we have better decision making. When we change the way we show up, we can invite in more love. We can invite in the qualities that we want to see flourish in our life, and we can cultivate them within ourselves. We can show up to our relationships how we want to, because we're cultivating ourselves. We're filling our own cup, which is the best place to give love from. Now, the breathing practice is powerful, not just because of its capacity to help people to heal, not just because it's powerful, because it's simple and anyone can do it so long as they're breathing. And there's a few contraindications for certain individuals with lung disorders or communicable respiratory diseases, of course. But the vast majority of people can take part in this breathing practice. And of course, anyone can breathe. But it's powerful because it can take you into non-ordinary states of consciousness. Just like taking a plant medicine. Some of the journeys can be quite psychedelic. Now, what I mean by non-ordinary states of consciousness is the breath is the bridge between the conscious and the subconscious. And the conscious mind is usually attuned to the five senses externally. When we orientate our awareness within and we begin to follow the breathing process with our eyes closed in meditation and absorption, we begin to become more aware of the internal sensations, and there's a whole nother world in there. And depending on the brainwave frequency, we can attune our mind to different aspects of ourself. If you're familiar with psychology, I could use the terms the collective unconscious, the subconscious, the superconscious, the reservoir of archetypes. There are many different dimensions in life, such as the dream state that many of us, that we're all familiar with. And there are other realms, astral realms, etc., that we can begin to attune our brain to. And if you like the science of some of this stuff, your brain has brainwave frequencies, and often in our waking state, we're in like what's called a beta frequency. And there's alpha, which is more like a lower frequency. It's more relaxed and it cycles per second. And then as we get lower in the frequency, we enter more into like a trance state. And as we go even lower, it's our delta sleep state. There are ones higher, such as the gamma, but just as a simple spectrum of energy there, we have the more stimulated, drinking coffee, doing work in the world state at the beta level. And as you drop into some of these deeper alpha and theta states, you can move your consciousness in very unique ways. And the experience can be quite colorful. Your senses can begin to merge, so you could, in some sense, hear colors. This phenomenon is called synesthesia. Any number of things can happen. Body sensations, I mentioned, tingling and numbness. Visions, you may see a past relative who has moved on to the other side. You may see a future scenario that has not yet happened. All of these seemingly extraordinary capacities are within the realm of normal, and they're quite common in the breathwork experience when doing the breathwork practice enough. Any one practice, though, is unique, and every practice is different. Any one practice is exactly what you need because it's your own best medicine. This is, just to prop up this beautiful medicine again, it's not something you have to take outside of you. It's not going to create imbalances in one organ to help another organ. It's your own best medicine because it's your body's wisdom, it's your breath, and once again, it has an intelligence to it. You become more intelligent as you do it. You become more aware, more sensitive. Not just more sensitive and more resilient, meaning that your nervous system is more sensitive, it's more aware, but it doesn't create fragility, it creates resilience. Meaning that despite having more awareness, you can actually be more resourced and regulated in stressful environments. This will teach healthy boundaries. Now, because this breathwork practice is really powerful, this is why I'm trained as a trauma-aware therapist in this way. And I've taken extensive training in a number of different indigenous practices, which also carry the same intelligence to hold the space in such a way where individuals feel safe and have the availability to move through a process that can be quite intense. So I'm not making this video so that you can practice this, and I haven't given you enough information to really develop a nice session and do it in a good way, because I'm not intending for that, because this process needs to be taught. It's not wise to try to do this style of breath work on your own without a guide, without a facilitator who's well trained. And the more well trained the facilitator is, the deeper you can go, because they're more aware of what's going on in the system and how to best help. And it's not completely true, but it's has a truth to it, is that you can't take somebody further than you've gone yourself. There's a certain amount of safety and ease that an individual can hold as a space holder that allows an individual to as well drop into that level of safety and ease because of the experience, the confidence, the way they hold space, the way they call in that space. So that there's a safety there, and that allows for those psychic armors to begin to soften. That's why the relationship between the breathwork facilitator and the breather is so important. Often when I work with people, the biggest traumas aren't coming up in the first session, even if they feel safe. There's a process of getting to know somebody that allows for the deeper work to be done, or doing it in a container where there are other people in there, which also can create safety, depending on the container, of course, and who's all in there. So once again, that's a topic that I would love to go into in more detail, but we're getting towards that hour point, so I don't want to open that one up here. So I'm going to go over a review of what we talked about in as best as I can, and then add in any other additional pieces I feel resonant, maybe a few tangents, and then we'll call a conclusion for this episode. So I was speaking about conscious connected breathwork today, of the Breathwave lineage, my teacher Robin Clements and Edward Dangerfield, heralded by the Babaji, Mahavatar Babaji, the creator of the conscious connected breathwork technique. I gave an introduction to why breathing is important and how it goes off when we're young at an early age. For myself, I had my cord wrapped around my neck, so I had very early breathing dysregulation. This leaves a legacy in the breath and the breathing process, a subconscious pattern that we're repeating around 22 to 26,000 times a day. If this is a suboptimal pattern, this is the default mode in our nervous system and in our self-regulation. To the degree that we are unconscious of that, it's hard to self-regulate. And if we have a life of avoiding, because the vast majority of our culture has been taught to seek things outside of ourselves for regulation and comfort, there can be a situation like I had where I wasn't very self-resourced or self-regulated, So I sought a lot of things outside of myself. This conditioned my nervous system in a way. But the healing is possible for anyone who's willing and dedicated to do the work, and our breath is always with us. It doesn't create dependence, and the more you do it, the better you get at working with the breath, the more conscious and more intelligent you become. Breath has an intelligence to it. It's pure energy and information, just like sunlight. It's absorbed and used in the system in a very good way. Especially when breathing proper, we can regulate our whole nervous system, our endocrine system, physical, emotional, mental, everything becomes balanced. There are no problems outside of ourselves. Our mind is the thing that develops the problems, that attaches to the problems, our future projections, our past, the reservoir of negative emotion that we hold from the stored trauma or from just the challenges in our life. That's all there. And it's all represented in the breathing process and pattern. Each and every moment, too, our breathing process is a representation of how we're thinking and feeling, what's going on for us. There's many layers in the breath, and it takes a dedicated professional to be able to read through some of that subconscious patterning to see that the way the breath flows. I shared a little bit about the breathing technique, the conscious connection of it, how that completes a circuit of energy, how we aim to have a nice full breathing pattern. I didn't get into breathing imbalances in this episode. I talked a little bit about holding patterns in the diaphragm and other systems, but there's a way to translate the breath and the breathing process, to read the language of the breath and how it moves through the body and where particular blockages are. Maybe this is a pause before the inhale. Maybe there's a contraction in the liver space. Maybe there is a control on the exhale, its inability to let go. I talked a little bit about contractions in the throat space related to control patterns, holding anger, needing to express emotions, things of this nature. Benefits of the breath. I could do a full episode on this because they do span mental clarity of mind, creativity of mind, expansive states of mind, altering states of consciousness, seeing above and beyond your problems, physical, detoxification, circulation, regulation of endocrine function, emotional, clearing of negative emotion, expansive states, moving into states of contentment, as well as joy, bliss, ecstasy, spiritual. Your breath is your spirit. Connection to a higher force, the one thing with you between birth and death. Many people have out-of-body experiences, things that show them that this body and mind is not the only thing, that there is something more to us. The system of breathing teaches us self-regulation, self-healing, self-realization, knowing the true self beyond the body and the mind. In order to do this technique properly, it's important to have safe and sacred space, and to work with a trained facilitator until you have learned this technique properly or you've taken the appropriate trainings, because it is a powerful practice. It can be like taking a psychedelic. You wouldn't do this willy-nilly. You shouldn't do this willy-nilly. It's not wise. So there are ways to do it responsibly, and it makes it most effective. There are many ways in which I work, which I didn't get into, on how I assist recorrecting the breathing pattern through body work. This may be a simple presencing of the hand. It may be verbal coaching. It may be a number of different techniques that I work with, from Thai massage to myofascial to energy work, qigong, etc. But there's many ways that an individual can correct that breathing pattern, and that's the key with this technique. Is we want to correct the subconscious pattern, and you do enough of this work, the subconscious pattern becomes more full and deep, meaning the pattern that you don't have to think about, meaning that your default set tone of the nervous system in breathing is relaxed and easeful, so that even if you have a stressful life and a busy life, you can show up and not be so reactive to the stress in the same way that you were before. You can express and experience more resilience and choice, because circumstances don't matter, only your state matters. And you can choose your state more readily when you have more control of your breath. Control of the breath is control of the life force. This is the most fundamental relationship you have. It's with the breath. Between birth and death, this is the breath. Between birth and death, the breath controls the mind. You control your breath, you orientate your mind and emotions. This is empowerment. This is why I teach this practice more so than I teach Thai massage and other things that I can help people with, because I don't want to heal them. I want them to be their own healers primarily. And I can offer you a way to do that, and many other people can as well. And this empowers you to be more of you. This empowers you to be instrumental in your healing process. This empowers you to tap into the intelligence within you, which allows you to touch into your gifts more, to touch into the wisdom within you, because the deepest questions can't be found on Google. The deepest questions are within you, And dedicated periods of turning within allow you to tune into this inner resource, this inner wisdom. It's in every cell. DNA carries so much information, but we need to pay attention to what's inside, because the vast majority of our culture is looking outside. Very fixed in the senses, very busy world. Not everyone's going to become a yogi and a meditator like myself. But integrating some of these practices in whatever way feels most adaptable and sensible to your life is going to benefit them. It's going to create more balance. Balance between internal and external. Balance between your nervous system. Which is going to allow you to show up to your relationships. It's going to allow you to be more content with your life the way it is. This breathing process is not aimed at getting you somewhere other than where you're at. The emphasis is always on meeting yourself in the sticky spaces, in the shadowy dark spaces. This breath technique will reveal those deeper subconscious patterns, those unmet needs, if you practice it over time, those traumas. So the way in which we do this is we don't try to get anywhere. That's also a pattern that shows up, trying to get somewhere, always trying to be somewhere other than where we are. This is why it's a meditative technique as well as a breathing technique. Meditation is the art of being, not doing something. And when we're willing to take dedicated periods to be with ourselves, we'll find everything that we need. It's all within us. It's ancient wisdom. Most of us know it intellectually. I'm trying to embody it to the best of the way that I know how and share it with others. And this is one of my ways of doing that and joining in that co-creative space, because when you take part in it, I take part in it, and more of us can take part in it, and it begins a ripple. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing to have the breath, which is so simple. It's so simple. It's right underneath our nose. It's like the secret. The secret that everybody has. It's right there. It's so simple. It's like a fish in water. It doesn't realize that it's covered in a vast ocean of intelligence. So, I really love breathing, and I hope you do too, because, well, between birth and death, that's what we're doing here. Whether we're singing or speaking, these are all expressions of the breath. How the breath flows, how it moves. This is the story of our life. Now, that story can be subconscious, or we can begin to write that story more consciously. And that's when we learn the language of the breath. Thank you for listening. Aya Om.